Hi, third graders. We're going to read the book Susan B. Anthony, People Who Made a Difference by Don McLeese. This is Susan B. Anthony on the left and her biographer, Ida Husted Harper, in 1898. A biographer is someone who meets with a person who's still living and talks to them about their life so they can write a biography about them. Equal rights for all. Susan B. Anthony worked hard for equal rights for all Americans. She believed that women should be treated the same as men. She also believed that slavery should be outlawed. Before the Civil War, many African Americans were owned by white people. They were known as slaves and they had to work without being paid. Susan knew this was wrong. Quaker Girl. Susan Brownell Anthony was born on February 15, 1820. Her father, Daniel, owned a cotton mill. Her mother was named Lucy. The family believed in the Quaker religion. Quakers said that men and women were equal and that slavery and war were evil. Susan learned a lot from her religion. This is Susan's birthplace in Adams, Massachusetts. Here's a picture of Susan as a young reformer. A woman's place. When Susan was growing up, women weren't allowed to vote or own property. Many people felt that a woman's place was in the home. Women were expected to cook and clean, keep house, and raise the children while men went to work. Those few women who took jobs outside the house were paid much less than men. Here's Susan as a teacher. Teaching and learning. Susan finished school when she was 17 and started teaching. This is one of the few jobs women were allowed to hold. After the family moved to Rochester, New York in 1845, Susan continued to work as a teacher. The job paid her only $2 a week. She learned that men doing the same job were paid 4 or 5 times more. Many causes. Susan stayed busy with many causes. She worked to end slavery and to outlaw liquor because Quakers were against both. When she tried to speak at rallies, she was told that women should listen and learn, while the men did the talking. She knew that if women had the same rights as men, she could help society in other ways. This is Susan's new home after she moved to Rochester, New York. Women's rights movement. While working against slavery, Susan met Elizabeth Cady Stanton in 1851. For the rest of the century, Susan and Elizabeth were the two strongest leaders for women's rights. They started the American Equal Rights Association. They also published a newspaper. Susan and Elizabeth said they wanted justice for all, women and men, black and white. Here's a picture of Susan on the left and Elizabeth Cady Stanton on the right. Failure is impossible was Susan's slogan, and you can see that written on the top part of this pin. Under arrest. Women weren't allowed to vote, and Susan was arrested when she went to vote. In 1873, a New York judge said she had to pay a fine of $100 for trying to vote. Susan refused, but she wasn't sent to jail. She said in a speech that the rights of Americans are for we, the people, not we, the white male citizens. A national hero. In the early 1900s, Susan met with President Theodore Roosevelt about letting women vote. In Washington, D.C., she gave a speech where she said failure is impossible. She died on March 13, 1906. In 1920, Congress passed the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. It is known as the Susan B. Anthony Amendment because it gave women the right to vote. So here's Susan in the 1890s. Her memory lives on. In 1979, the United States issued a silver dollar coin with a picture of Susan B. Anthony on it. It was called the Susan B. Anthony dollar. The Susan B. Anthony house, where she lived in Rochester, New York, is open as a museum. It is a National Historic Landmark. People from all over the country come to honor the woman who did so much for equal rights. Some important dates to remember. In 1820, Susan B. Anthony is born. In 1845, her family moves to Rochester, New York. In 1851, Susan B. Anthony meets Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And in 1906, Susan B. Anthony dies. It's not listed here, but 1920 is another important date to remember because that was the year that Congress passed the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote.